Welcome to Earnhardt, a NASCAR podcast that takes a deep dive into Earnhardt, the Amazon Prime docuseries. I'm Ryan McGee of ESPN. In the first 3 episodes, we talked to the rivals that went up against the Intimidator on the racetrack. We also talked to the Earnhardt family, who talked about being with Dale Earnhardt at home and also at the racetrack, and what it was like to carry that last name then and what it's like to carry it now. In our 4th episode of the podcast, we're going to take you under the hood of the film itself with director Joshua Altman. How in the world did they sort through hundreds of hours of footage, all of those races, all of those interviews, the interviews they conducted, and then piece all that together to tell the story of the greatest name in the history of stock car racing? This is my interview with director Joshua Altman. All right, Josh Altman, I'm going to nerd out on you right off the bat. All right, so I worked on the documentary Dale almost 20 years ago, and I'm going to just refer to that as the kind of the prelude to this one, right? And I worked on another big E60 piece for ESPN 3 years ago. I thought after 30 years I had seen all of the footage of Dale Earnhardt, right? And I was there for a lot of these moments. The most surprising aspect of this for me as a career media center guy is there was so much I'd never seen before. What was the archive Indiana Jones archaeological dig like for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, it started off, in NASCAR. We came to them and they told us that they had like 15 petabytes of material just of their own stuff. And we were like, number one, most of us had never heard of a petabyte. We didn't know what that meant.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. My brain only goes to terabyte. I don't know what a petabyte is.
So trying to take a look at that and figure out how we could get stuff in, how we could start absorbing what we needed. And I guess the kind of filmmakers that we are, we're like, we want everything. Usually people are just like, give me the clip of this and this. And we're like, we want the handles of that, because there's these little things. And I'm sure you saw in the series where it's like, a moment where the camera turns on or something. We're like, we want that. Like, we want all that stuff. So it was tough to figure that out and then start getting stuff in. And we had a great team really over on our end on Archival, really led by this woman, Kelsey Arlington. She did just a great job in terms of sourcing things, and NASCAR had great people on their end that really helped us sort of point us in the right direction and start to unearth all these treasure troves. And then I think on top of that, having Dale and Kelly both open up all of their stuff was just, brought it to the next level.
Now, I don't know this about you, so tell me if I'm right or wrong. I don't believe you grew up watching NASCAR. Is that fair?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So that perspective, I think, is always amazing. Now, the NASCAR people are kind of like soccer people, right? They're like, I don't know if I want an outsider coming in and looking at this, but I think that the perspective, it gives you clarity maybe that you don't have because you're attached to it emotionally, or you're attached to it because you lived it. What was your experience just kind of walking into this, knowing the story, but really walking in cold?
Yeah, most of us were NASCAR newbies. And I mean, I'll speak for myself here, but I find that I tend to go towards projects that I don't know much about, rather than ones where I'm like, I'm a huge fan and I want to dive into it. For some reason, I don't know. I like stuff that I'm like, I don't know anything about this, and I get to be a sponge and absorb it. And I think that's helpful. I mean, in my mind, in terms of like helping to communicate that to an audience who also doesn't know, to somehow, if there's enough that fascinates me, I know that it can fascinate them. So I will say this too, that initially, I sat down, my EP and partner on this, Dan Lindsay, had sort of pitched it to me one night, and I went back home and started watching things online. First of Dale Sr. and all the footage of NASCAR. And I was like, oh, this is incredible. And just that online, that existed. And I started watching then interviews of Dale Earnhardt Jr. And that's what really hooked me. Like, he was just so open, charming, real, authentic, that I was like, well, you just can't help but want to like spend time with him via this. And I was like, I know that will communicate to an audience outside of NASCAR,
Well, and I think that's the part that is going to resonate with the audience, whether they know anything about it or not, which is Dale Jr. is so open and honest, almost philosophical. And Kelly is so open and honest, not just about racing, but about their relationship with their father. your reaction as they started to lay these things out for you?
Well, we came in with some knowledge of it. Like I said, we had done our research and sort of, obviously reading all their books, and just watching interviews and podcasts. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's tough. I sat down with him. Initially, it was supposed to be like a 2-hour interview, the first interview, and I think it ended up going to like 4. And that sort of ended up happening time and time again. They were both just so open and, I mean, trusting in us and sharing of everything. It was kind of amazing. Yeah, I couldn't ask for better partners from them. But I guess my reaction to that was just, constantly wanting to know more and ask more questions. I mean, I guess that's just in my nature, but they both really sort of continue to tell us everything and really, really open up in a way that I think, in my mind, I don't know what's sort of everything that's been talked about before, but I'd like to think that there's new stuff coming out for people who are already fans.
No, there definitely is, and I think that's going to be very obvious as soon as people start watching this. So, there's kind of 2 stories about Dale Earnhardt, right? Mm-hmm. And I think you get him in the tent with the Intimidator and Man in Black, and then there's the man and the father, and it's never been told like this before. Did you know that going in? Did that story of the fatherhood become this second story that maybe you didn't see, or vice versa? What was your experience as you learned about Dale Earnhardt?
Yeah, it was always meant to be a family story. That's how we pitched it. We were like, we would comp like The Godfather and be like, The Godfather might be seen as a mob story, but really it's a family story. They just happen to be in the mob. And for us, this is very much a family story. They just happen to be NASCAR drivers. So that was always the intention behind it. I think, for us, it branched out more as we got into it with Kelly, and really saw her being more of a force in this, you know what I mean? As well as obviously including Kerry in that. And I think, all the other family members as well. But the interesting thing is like, a piece of this that we started to really figure out in the edit, Dale Earnhardt Sr. is like the gravitational center of this universe. You know what I mean? In their family, in NASCAR during that time, everything. And so every time that we went too far in a family story or deviated where he wasn't somehow being referenced or felt or his presence acknowledged, like it felt like we were losing focus and the story was losing focus. And so you'll notice when you watch it, every scene, even the ones that are about Dale and Kelly, are somewhat telling us something about Dale Sr., that he is always, even when he's gone in episode 4 and he's no longer with us, that he's still a part of that story. And I guess that says a lot about who he was as a person.
Well, what I say all the time is if you were in a room with 500 people and they're all facing a stage and he walked in the back door and didn't say a word, everyone would just turn around because the air changes in the room. It feels like you were kind of in the room with that guy during this process.
Yeah. Hearing you say that, by the way, Dale Jr. said the same thing to me in an interview once. He was like, you see how we're having this conversation right now? He's like, my dad would walk in and something about him, he was like, you would just not be paying attention to me anymore. You'd just be paying attention to him. So it's interesting that he had that presence and that effect on people.
The responsibility as a filmmaker to portray people. How is that experience for you? Because especially someone who's not here any longer and someone that people probably have preconceived notions about, who they were or who they are. What's that responsibility like for you as a filmmaker?
Yeah, I mean, it's important. It's, I think at a lot of, especially for someone who's not here anymore, like you're saying, it's kind of everything. We're utilizing other voices to get inside Dale's head at times to really tell us and help us understand things. And at the same time, I had an incredible team, again, of people from our AEs to our producers who were just sort of sorting through his interviews, his archival interviews, like treasure troves of archival interviews that he'd done over the years with all these different people and figuring out how to sort that. One of my producers, Rial, just like created a catalog of all of his stuff, that everything that he had said over the course of, decades. And at times, I think it was important for us to figure out how to best still keep him alive there and how to use his words as much as possible. And I know from talking to like Dale Jr. that, that stuff also sunk in with him because there were pieces that he had never heard from his father or didn't remember him saying that sort of came back, you know.
Well, and talking to the Earnhardt family and talking to other people who've seen the film, everyone's talking about Hank Parker. Hank Parker
Mm.
Sr. is, a guy I grew up watching fishing on television, right? But his perspective on who Dale Earnhardt was, it's interesting with the children, with Carrie and with Dale Jr. and with Kelly. They kind of feel like they learned even more about their dad because Hank
Mm-hmm.
Parker Sr., I thought he was tremendous.
Mm. Yeah, 100% agree. He was, I mean, just a light. I mean, we sort of had an inclination to this before we sat down with him for an interview because we had seen, the podcast that he did with Dale. And when we watched that, we were all like, whoa, this is incredible. As I could feel Dale must have felt in the room that day. So we already had some idea going into it. And I think when we sat down with him, it just really opened up for us, like, the insight, the window, and the places where he was there, and the connection between Dale and Ralph that he was able to open up for us, but also between having having his son also be a race car driver and be around Dale Jr.'s age, and that sort of connection. So yeah, and there's obviously a lot of stuff that we had to leave on the cutting room floor, but yeah, he was a godsend for us, really.
Yeah. Well, he had the moments that the children wanted to have, which is being, and Kelly says it, right? Wanting to be on the fishing boat and wanting to take these trips and wanting to do these things. That was the part that I thought Hank Parker did. One of my favorite aspects of the series of the film is how you kind of set the stage at the start of each episode of this is what this era felt like.
Mm-hmm.
It's the 70s and it's the 80s and it's the 90s. What was it like kind of piecing that together and teaching people and also teaching yourself about, all right, the racetrack is the racetrack, but it was a very different place in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and then on into the 2000s?
Well, first off, thank you. I'm glad that that's resonating with you and coming through because it's tough. You put these things in and we watch it over and over again, and I forget sometimes. I'm like, I think this is working. Um, yeah, it's a time machine, right? That's kind of the beauty of having this much archival is that we really, and we wanted to do this. The intent was to like take people and transport them back in time and have them really live in these eras. You know what I mean? In a lot of ways, to see what it's like to be back there in the 80s and sort of that rough and tough attitude of everything. And also just coming into the sport from 1979 and like, it was nothing. Like it was just this sort of small thing compared to what it is now. It's kind of amazing, and for us, a big part of this is that Dale Sr. was the transformative force within that. Like he was not just a great driver; he was the one who really transformed the sport. He was the face of it. He was the guy who created this the model around your name, image, and likeness as it relates to commodifying the business side of it. And he did that with a ninth grade education. So I mean, all that was sort of something that we learned. And I think, having that, I think it's important in order to experience that growth and to watch him be the person who does it. I think, we had to figure out how to like sort of set the eras right and experience those decades, you know what I mean? As they sort of, as they progress.
One of the things that Dale Jr. says in the film is, and I've heard him say this before, about he was personally caught off guard at how big his father actually was,
Mhm.
and learned that following his death. He always talks about the graphics on television that show 1950 whatever to 2001. Were you caught off guard by how big Dale Earnhardt actually was once you started digging into all this?
Well, I guess we came into this again, not like all of us, for the most part, were newbies, right? And I think, as outsiders, the name is known, and it's funny. We have similar stories between a lot of us that like we'd be like, oh yeah, I remember that name. I remember he was a NASCAR driver in mustache. I remember he died tragically on the track, but there's like little bits, and we didn't really know the story. So in research beforehand, we just sort of like obviously started to piece together like, wait a second, like this is someone who deserves to be seen on the same level as Michael Jordan, Babe Ruth, even someone like Elvis. That we were like, this is an American icon. You know what I mean? How to how to make sure that the series sort of spoke to that and brought in an audience who wasn't aware of that and made him seen it, made Dale Earnhardt Sr. seen as that. That was important to us.
Well, he's a superhero, but this idea of humanizing the superhero, that's a storyteller's dream, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, a lot of that comes through the kids, I think, in a lot of ways, right? You know what I mean? Like you said, Dale Jr. sort of like struggling with these two sides of his father, looking at him as this superhero, and at the same time, this guy who's his dad, but also this person that he admires. He just wants to be next to him, be like him. This is one little interview clip in the film. It's Dale Earnhardt Jr. Probably, I don't know, he's probably 20 years old. He looks a lot younger a lot of times, so it's hard to gauge. But he says something along the lines of like, I just want to get a compliment from him. Because to get a compliment from the guy who's the best NASCAR driver out there would mean anything. It's almost like this, seeing this guy as this incredible force, but at the same time, it's his dad. How crazy that must have been like for him.
When we talk to people who grow up in the business like Dale Jr. did, as a filmmaker, I have to ask you this: what is it like to work under this umbrella of Imagine? With Brian Grazer and with Ron Howard. I mean, Hollywood legends as a storyteller. What is that experience like for you, and what was that experience like on this film?
I mean, they could not have been more supportive. So that's great. And I think, just encouraging and open to, the process of being a filmmaker and going out there and getting what we need and trusting us to put it together. So that's first and foremost, I think, incredible. And also, what the name brings with it. I think every place that we went into, even sitting down with Dale Earnhardt Jr. initially, having Ron Howard and Brian behind you is something where you're just immediately thrust into another level. And people trust you, I think, as well because of that you're sort of operating within that. But also, it means that you have to reach that standard and make something that's really good,
It's like driving for Dale Earnhardt, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
So I'm asking this question of everyone, and I asked this of people who were very close to Dale, and now I'm going to ask it of someone who became very close to Dale because of this project. What do you believe that the legacy of Dale Earnhardt is?
Yeah, it's crazy. We asked that so many times of almost everybody that we sat down with too, now that I think about it. And it's weird to like, for myself, to sort of put that into words though, because I think I'm sort of pulling from everybody that we've met. And that's a lot of various things. I think for Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Kelly, you know what I mean? I think in a lot of ways for them, they're constantly still working to honor his legacy and to make sure it's being felt. This idea of him slipping away was something that was brought up to us, when we first sat down with them, even before the cameras. I see him as this, and again, part of it's because of just being immersed in this world for the past 2 years. But I see him as an undeniable legend. You know what I mean? Someone again like of status that deserves to be seen with these people whose names are unforgettable. So to think that he in any way could be forgotten or is not being seen as such, especially within the sport, is kind of like unfathomable to me. I think in a lot of ways, like I can't even grasp the fact that like somebody within the sport would not. I understand the people outside the sport, such as myself, coming in and not having the knowledge of it, just being sort of ignorant of it, being like, okay, like this is something you need to open your eyes to and understand. But within the sport, it's just kind of crazy to me that he would not be seen as someone who, literally transformed the sport. Like he was the face of this thing, and really elevated everything and brought it to a place of where it is today.
Was there a moment that you discovered, as you were working on the film? Like, all right, so just full disclosure, I grew up a huge Richard Petty fan. Couldn't stand Dale Earnhardt when I was a kid. But then there was a moment where I was like, okay, you know what? I accept the fact. You might be a Cleveland Cavaliers fan, and at some point you just go, all right, Michael Jordan's Michael Jordan. Was there a moment that you went, this guy is the badass that everybody's been telling me that he is?
I mean, first off, I'm curious what that moment was like for you as a Petty fan. Do you know what it was?
Well, yeah, it was at Talladega. He came from 18th to first inside the last 5 laps of the race to win, with Kenny Wallace pushing him. And I remember I went down. You got to talk to Chocolate Myers. I remember I went
Yeah, yeah.
down to as a media member. I went down and stood behind the number 3 hauler, going to get post race sound because he's going to finish like 10th, and he's
Hmm.
not going to go to Victor Lane. Well, they're loading up the gear, and I just watch him go by each lap, and he's passed another 7 cars, another 6 cars, and he wins a race. And Chocolate looked at me and he goes, he's going to be pissed when he finds out you were down here thinking he's going to finish 10th. So yeah, that was the day I was like, all right, you know what? He's the guy. But I mean, Richmond, when he's out wiping the mud off the windshield or the pass in the grass. I mean, was there a moment where you looked at it and went, this looks like something out of a Marvel movie, but it's a real guy?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of those. There's one moment in particular. It's actually not in the series. We had to cut it out, and we couldn't find a way to work it back in to make sense of it. But there's a moment, and initially, to be honest with you, we didn't quite understand the moment. It was until we spoke to Dale Jr. and he gave us the context of it and really spelled it out. There's a moment where he's in this car, he's in the Wrangler car, blood all over his face. The glass is broken, and he's like wiping, glass off of his face with like a rag, and trying to continue the race. And what had happened was, a piece of the car in front of him. I forget what the piece was, but it was a massive piece that hurtled through the air and just landed on the car and crashed into the window and then bounced off. I mean, he was inches away from death, really. Uh, and rather than being like, whoa, that was scary, it was like sitting in the car, wiping blood off, ready to go again. I mean, I just don't know, not even in NASCAR, just in any sport, really, of someone who is that like singularly focused on success. I mean, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, as we like to say, that's why they sell Dale Earnhardt T-shirts and they don't sell T-shirts to the rest of us, right?
Yeah, I mean, to
And
go to a NASCAR race and see threes still on people's bumper stickers, still on flags. There's no sport that I can think of that has that. There's nobody that has made that kind of impact. Like, it's unparalleled.
and this film was unparalleled. So thank you for that, Josh Altman, and thank you for the time to talk about it. And welcome to the NASCAR world. We're assuming you're going to be watching races every weekend now, right?
I will. I'll be there is it Saturday? I'm going to the Saturday race this week. So
There you go. There you go. You're there. All right. Thank you, man. We really appreciate the
thanks so
time,
much,
and
man. Appreciate
congratulations
the time.
again. Isn't it always fascinating to have someone come into the NASCAR world from the outside and then learn about it on the job? Thank you to Joshua Altman for his time and his insight. And I believe him when he says he's a fan now. It's been an interesting perspective, an interesting ride for me personally, because I knew Dale Earnhardt a little bit. I did work on a couple of very sizable Dale Earnhardt documentary projects over the years. And yeah, I got to co-write Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s book just a few years ago. And so the ability to watch this and to still learn after all these years about someone that, quite honestly, I already knew everything there was to know about him. That is not just a surprise, it's a gift. And thank you to the filmmakers. Thank you to those who participated in the film for giving us that gift. A fascinating, flawed superhero, a human superhero. And that's who we were able to learn about and who we were able to get to know a little bit better in this docuseries. And that is, it's an experience. I think anyone who has watched that film, and hopefully those of you who've listened to this podcast series, feel that exact same way. Be sure to follow Earnhardt, our NASCAR podcast, and stream Earnhardt, the docuseries, now available on Amazon Prime Video. Thank you to everyone who assisted with us, who participated with us, and who shared with us here on this podcast. I'm Ryan McGee of ESPN. Thanks for watching.